What's up, man? I want to do this video. I did one before. I think what last year or something like that. You know, since the Last Dance is coming out with the Chicago Bulls last season, 1998, when they won the sixth title. Everybody making their videos and their observations on different aspects of the Bulls dynasty. I seen Draymond Green. He was uh on Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson's podcast. They asked him, who he think is the better team, the Golden State Warriors or the Chicago Bulls dynasty. Of course, he should pick the Golden State Warriors, and he said what I said last year. They both played in two different eras. He said the Bulls played in the physical era, and they played in the era where you could use your speed. And he said that if we played them in their era, I believe we would have lost. If they would have played in our era, I believe they would have lost. Now, that was a good breakdown by Draymond Green because he understands basketball, man. A lot of people don't understand basketball, and they don't understand how the rules of the game changes the outcome of different eras. That's why it's hard to compare eras. What I can say is I know for a fact. I can't say I know for a fact, but I know that the Bulls in the physical era had the advantage over Golden State. They just did, man. Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, not Horace Grant, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, Michael Jordan, Ron Harper. Those guys were able to hand check you. And I have seen Steph Curry, and I also have seen Kevin Durant go up against physical teams, and this is our prime examples. I seen when Kevin Durant went up against Memphis. You would probably just look at the type in the Memphis Grizzlies versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think it was like three had to be like 3 or 4 years ago, about four years ago, and Memphis were considered at that time a physical team, and they were playing physical against Kevin Durant under the rules that are now, and he was looking uncomfortable. I mean, he still, was able to do things because he's a gifted offensive player, but he looked uncomfortable versus Memphis. Chicago played that physical and more because the rules allowed them to play that physical. So I think the Bulls would have won in their era, and I think the Bulls would have beat Golden State in this era. Case in point, when the Bulls played teams that were less physical than them, those teams had no chance because the Bulls were also quick, fast, and very skilled. The Bulls was mostly a finesse team. They were able to play physical on defense because they was physical on defense, but on offense, the Bulls was a finesse team on offense, and they could score with the best of them. I know Draymond Green said that back then he seen playoff games that were the Bulls was winning like 85-70, something like that. That's just because the game back then where there were less possessions, you allowed to play physical defense, and most teams back then played a half court game. It's like you will hear the expression that that team is a team that's playoff built because they play a half court game, and they'll say, well, if you see a team that are built, to be fast up and down the court, a lot of times in the playoffs that doesn't work as well. You have to be able to score in the half court, and back then, a lot of teams played half court basketball. That's just what it was back then, because of the centers. The centers were the focal point of a lot of offenses back then. So the ball was thrown into the post, fed into the post, and you worked from the inside out. Now you work from the outside in, which to me is, it's it makes no sense working from the outside in because the outside is the less efficient shot than the inside. Nevertheless, you have a lot of people like Daryl Morey and all these guys that are these high analytic guys who think they know basketball. They don't know basketball because if you think a 3-point shot is better than a 2-point shot, you know, it's it is what it is. Like I said, it is what it is. But I digress on that, but the Bulls were a finesse team on the offensive end, and when they faced teams that were less physical, the Bulls blew those teams out. You had to be physical versus the Bulls to keep them from blowing you out, from embarrassing you. Like Detroit Pistons did for a while, like the New York Knicks did, like the Miami Heat did. A lot of those teams in the Eastern Conference, like Indiana Pacers, a lot of those teams built their team to have physical players. Like say for instance, we're gonna say Detroit. They had Rick Mahorn, Lambeer, Dennis Rodman, John Sally. All those guys were built were there to be physical versus Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan. And then when the Bulls finally got past the Pistons, the Knicks built their team just like the Pistons. They had Patrick Ewing in the middle. They had Xavier McDaniel. You know what I'm saying? Those guys, those they had like a lot of players, Charles Oakley, a lot of physical players that were there to beat up on Jordan and Scottie Pippen. You know what I'm saying? Or Tony Kukoc. You know what I'm saying? Then when the Bulls kind of dispatched the New York Knicks, the Miami Heat and the Indiana Pacers had the Davis boys. You know what I'm saying? Down low, to beat up and be physical. So all those teams built their teams to be physical because they knew that they could not face the Bulls in a up and down game on offense. They could not allow Jordan and Scottie Pippen them, Tony Kukoc and them to get up in the open floor because it was going to be they were going to get ran at the gym. So they had to play physical. So if Golden State is unable to play physical versus the Chicago Bulls, even in this era, I could put the Bulls in this, put that team, and put any version of those teams that won championships. I can put them in this era, and they'll be a championship team in this era because of the fact that they were skilled on offense. And the Bulls, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, them, they would have adjusted to the fact that they couldn't hand check, and they would have adjusted to that because even still now in the playoffs, even now they allow you to have some type of physicality in the playoffs. Now in the regular season, it'll be different, but in the playoffs, they still allow you to get to some type of physicality in the NBA. You cannot get to the physicality they were doing back then, but they do allow you to play some physical. So, I'll wrap it up by saying this: the Chicago Bulls. Now, we know that's a fantasy matchup between them because they'll never be able to play each other. They played in two different eras. But if you're gonna tell me who had the better, and then they asked him, did they ask Jeremiah Green too? Also, who was the better dynasty? Chicago Bulls was obviously the better dynasty. The Chicago Bulls, if you want to say the Chicago Bulls dynasty started when they beat the Lakers in the NBA Finals for their first title, all the way down to '98 when they beat Utah for their sixth title, because that's like a 7-8 year period. The Bulls had 6 titles in 8 years. You know what I'm saying? I don't know where if you start now, to be fair, you got to start both of them when they won titles. Now you start Golden State when they beat the Cleveland Cavaliers. What was that, 2015 for their first title, all the way up until they lost to the Toronto Raptors in what, 2019. So that's like a five year window. You would have to say the Bulls had a better dynasty because first of all, the Bulls never lost in the finals. They never lost when they went to the finals. And the Golden State Warriors, they let Cleveland come back from a 3-1 lead, and they lost to Toronto. Now we know that Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant got hurt. That's part of sports. Getting hurt is injury is part of sports. Unfortunately, it's part of sports. We can't this is the real world. You can't say everything got to be 100%. So because everything is not going to be 100%. But Golden State did lose in the finals twice, and the Bulls never lost in the finals twice. So that's just math. The Bulls had a better dynasty. The Golden State Warriors had a great dynasty. Don't get me wrong. They up there in the greatest dynasties in basketball. They up there with The first dynasty, a lot of people don't like to give it to them, but the Boston Celtics with Bill Russell, that's the first dynasty. That's the first great dynasty. Even though the Minneapolis Lakers had a pretty good dynasty, I think they won three. Um, then you got to put the Lakers in the early 80s in there with Boston. You probably got to throw the 76ers in there because the 76ers at that time, I believe 76ers won two titles with Dr. J, and they had went to a couple NBA finals because they did lose the finals versus the LA. So you got to probably put them in there. Golden State is in there. San Antonio is in there. A lot of people say that San Antonio never won back to back, but they still have a dynasty. That's, to me, that's still a dynasty. And Chicago Bulls, the team of the '90s, the team of the 2000s will be Golden State. So they will be recognized as a team of the 2000s. So you have to put them in there as a great dynasty because they did hold down. They were able to rise above all the teams in that decade, just like the Bulls. But the Bulls in the Celtics, back in the day, the Bill Russell Celtics, to me, are the only two teams that really dominated their decade that they were in. The Celtics probably spilled into another decade, but the Bulls really dominated the '90s. You know what I'm saying? They won 6 titles, out of a possible 10. So they really dominated the '90s. Um, you got to say the early '80 Lakers and the Celtics, they kind of shared that dynasty. Even though won the Lakers won 4 in that decade, and the Celtics won 3 in that decade. So they really shared the decade. The 2000s, you got to give it to Golden State, and like I said, they were a great dynasty for what they did in the 2000s. But to me, I would think, in my estimation, I believe the Bulls would have won in their era, and I believe the Bulls would have beat Golden State in their era. Now, it would have been a different game in this time because guys are more roam more freely. I don't think the Bulls would. I believe back then the Bulls would have dominated them. You know what I'm saying? Because go look at I ain't gonna say dominate them that they're not gonna win any games. I'll probably say it'll be probably like a 6 game, or it could possibly be a 5 game series, but we have to see because if you go back, a team that played like Golden State was those Phoenix Suns. Go back and look at the Phoenix Suns, man, and how they played the game. Phoenix Suns played a lot like Golden State. They were a fast break team up and down the court. They had versatile players. They had guys like Richard Dumans, Charles Barkley, Kevin Johnson, Dan Marley, Tom Chambers. People don't realize that guy Richard Dumans, that guy was a really really gifted basketball player. What derailed him was he couldn't stay off the drugs. But Richard Dumans that year, he put everything together, and he was a threat out on the basketball court, a big threat. But in this era, Golden State would have it could have been a hard 6. I got the Bulls in the hard 6. Back then, I got the Bulls in the soft 6, in the soft 6. So let me know who y'all think who will win in either era, and let me know who y'all will pick as the best dynasty. I'm out.